You know, sometimes in life we just stop doing what works. And I think Gus Malzahn made an incredible decision right before the postseason to start back calling plays for the Auburn Tigers. I'm pretty sure that all of this came about because he and Alan Green had weekly meetings. And you have to wonder, what did these guys talk about? Now, when you have let's just say you're a manager and you have an employee who is struggling in certain areas, but you do know that they have had a time where they were successful. So the universal question to ask is, well, Gus, what were you doing during the time when you had massive success? Because I look at I look at your background and I'm seeing games with 500 yards, 400 yards, scoring 30 plus points against some of the best defenses in the country. What was different? What was the thing that you did then that you're not doing now? Because something had to have changed because your numbers were too consistent. And really, when Gus, and then as an employee, you start to kind of dissect it and really think about it. What was I doing during that time? That's a great question, Alan. And Gus probably said, you know, now that you mention it, I was calling plays. You know, and Gus Malzahn was absolutely calling plays during some of the most successful offensive outputs, maybe even in Auburn history. Once again, it's K-Stu the GOAT for Vernon Speak Sports, mostly talking about Auburn's football and the rest of the SEC. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel before we get started with this thing. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang, War Eagle. Purdue came into the Music City Bowl giving up about 30 yards per game, giving up about 456 yards per game, but they were coming off some pretty nice victories throughout the season, including a monumental victory over Ohio State. Now, like I said before, it was announced right before the postseason that Gus Malzahn would be calling plays. I actually have a video that I'm going to thumbnail in this particular video that I'm doing now, which shows my prediction after I found out that Gus Malzahn was going to be calling plays. Because if Gus wouldn't have been calling plays and if it would have still been the musical chairs thing with Chip Lindsey, then my prediction would have been a lot different, and that Auburn probably would have actually struggled against a very motivated Purdue team. But following Gus's trend of when he's calling plays, a lot of things happen. One, Auburn has a very, very sometimes monumental amount of yards that they put up to 600 yards, which I'm going to explain a little bit later on. Another thing that you'll find in Gus Malzahn's offense is that you're going to have a very decent level of first downs being made. What does first downs lead to? It leads to the next thing that's really dominant in a Gus Malzahn run offense, which is first downs. First downs and time of possession, I'm sorry about that. But either way, we want to look at, first of all, how the immediate impact was with Gus Malzahn calling plays against Purdue. Well, for number one, they put up way more than 30 points, the 30 points that Purdue allows. They put up 63 points, and a lot of those came in the first half, which led to a first half bowl record of points. So when you look at that, teamed up with 586 yards and 24 first downs. That's the kind of output that you tend to get when you have a Gus Malzahn run offense. Now, I took the time and I wanted to see, okay, how is his impact in, say, high-level games? And what I would like to consider a high-level game, I've been following Auburn football for quite some time, and usually the common denominators of the high-level games are Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. So we're going to look at LSU first. We're going to use 2010, 2013, 2014. Those were the pinnacle times of Gus Malzahn calling plays. So when we look at LSU in 2010, had 526 total yards. 2013 against LSU, 457 yards, but 3 costly turnovers hurt Auburn in that game as they lost that one 35-21. But that game right there, though, in 2013, that started to open some eyes, though, because in that second half, Auburn performed very well, outscoring Tennessee 21-14 in that second half. And I think Nick Marshall started to get a little comfortable with what he was being asked to do. for the Auburn Tigers. And in 2014, it was an absolute, just a total domination for the Auburn Tigers as they rolled up 566 yards en route to a 41-7 win. And most important, dominated the time of possession and dominated the first down factor. And that's something that Auburn really definitely had to improve on, is that portion of the football game. Because if you have that factor in place this particular season, you're looking at more of a 10-2, 11-1 season, and maybe even being a little bit more competitive with Alabama with those particular things in place. So when I also look at the points in this against LSU, LSU in all of the years combined only gave up about 19 points per game, okay? Auburn averaged 28 points, including a 41-7 win over over LSU in 2014. And the record of Gus calling plays against LSU during this time, when he was at his height of calling plays, he was 2-1, okay? So now we move a little bit further. We go to Georgia, which is usually a very high consequence game, obviously, usually helps in deciding Auburn's fate in the SEC because it's such a late game. It's an SEC game, and usually a win against Georgia could possibly supplement, say, one loss already in the SEC West. So when you look at this particular team, with Gus Malzahn calling plays in 2010, this is when he had Cam Newton. Cam Newton had an incredible game that day. Auburn had a total of 463 yards and 28 first downs. I keep talking about the first downs. In order for this Gus Malzahn team to be at its fullest pinnacle, you got to have the first downs. And when you look at this, 24 to 25, 28, sometimes 30 first downs in the game, and that keeps that shows the results of keeping teams off balance. All right, so the only year that this was a particular problem for them, because I mean, you look at the 2013 Prayer and Jordan Hare team, that game shouldn't have even come down to that last play, because Auburn had the game, well in hand going into the fourth quarter, piling up 566 yards and 29 first downs. Incredible numbers when Gus Malzahn is calling plays. Now, the team that challenges Gus Malzahn the most, to where he's not going to get those record-breaking numbers, but he's still competitive compared to what other teams are able to do against Alabama. In 2010, of course, Alabama kept Cam Newton in check pretty good, all right? Auburn only had 342 yards that game. But once they found a niche as to how they could attack the Alabama defense, that's when the passing became a factor. And then once the passing became a factor, that's when the run-pass option started to open up, as Cam Newton started to have a little bit more room to run the football. In 2013 as well, Auburn struggled a little bit, but still found ways to find holes in the Alabama defense that year. The Alabama defenses have been very good in the Nick Saban era. So the fact that these numbers are a little lower going into the Alabama game absolutely makes sense, because Alabama was just incredible on defense. And you look at 2014, very, very unlikely Auburn, have well over 600 yards against an Alabama coach defense is just unheard of in losing that game 55-44. So when we talk about Gus Malzahn calling plays, we talk about the records of the high consequence games. You're looking at a record of 6-3 against his biggest rivals, the games that the Auburn fans absolutely want Gus Malzahn to win. He's 6-3 calling plays against these teams. He has a great number of first downs in comparison to other teams against these teams. So turns out Gus Malzahn calling plays was an excellent idea. Once again, it's K-Stu the GOAT for Vernon Speaks Sports, always talking about Auburn football. Comment, subscribe to the channel, like it, cool. If you don't like it, that's great too. But add to the dialogue at the end of the video. You have a good one, Auburn versus New Mexico at 1:30 on TNT today. In basketball, the first round, March Madness is upon us. Take care.